Our next session will be Legal's Digital Turning Point. We've got three amazing speakers up here for you. Their experience and their thought leadership in this space is really, in my estimation, without equal. I've enjoyed speaking with them over the years on a variety of different topics, but especially where the industry is going. Bob and I have connected a little bit more recently, and some of his conversations around what he's working on in terms of architecture have prompted a lot of what we're talking about today. And then separately, Dino and Fulcrum, who have actually been leading the way forward in terms of their thoughts on moving from, as Bob would put it, islands to archipelagos in terms of technology, is a lot of what we'll be talking about, they will be talking about today. From left to right, Dino Eliopoulos, you got it. It's not a complicated Greek name, it really isn't. Is the VP of Innovations and Solutions at Fulcrum. Dino is a technology strategist, an innovator, a leader focused on transforming the legal industry that we're operating in. He's the Vice President of Innovation and Solutions at Fulcrum GT. He designs and delivers enterprise platforms and streamlines operations. He's been enabling data-driven decision-making solutions, and he's driving forward the creation of new models for client and firm collaboration. Marcello Peviani, on our far right, a good friend and someone we've known for a long time as well, is the VP of Legal Operations and Strategic Services at Equinix. Marcello is a seasoned legal counsel and operations professional with a wide-ranging background in leading Fortune 500 companies. He's been across a variety of different technologies, including hardware, software, and SaaS, consumer products, etc. His career includes diversifying, transforming, and supporting models at various different companies. His leadership roles include geo markets and business units. Marcello and I have spent many hours talking about the future of the industry, and he's got some very unique takes, I think advanced takes in analogizing what we're doing in legal departments with a product's perspective, and he'll be talking more about that today. Last but definitely not least on the list today is Bob Haskins. We're delighted to have Bob with us. Bob is the Director of Solutions Enhancement, Solutions Enablement, and Business Intelligence and Global Affairs at Google. Bob is a trusted business partner, a problem solver and strategist who delivers transformation through technology. Bob's career is defined by a consistent trend pioneering firsts. Bob has an extensive career in our industry. He has worked at companies like Huron Consulting. I shouldn't say like, he's actually worked at Huron Consulting. Concilio, Moray, PayPal as a director of IT, and currently Google. I'm happy to say that all of those firms, I think, maybe except for Huron, is here with us today as sponsors and or participants. Please give a very warm welcome to Dino, Bob, and Marcello, and I'll let them continue on.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, first I'll start out by saying the last 15 minutes were an example of how unruly things have gotten, because everybody took an unscheduled break, so welcome back. Well, just to start out with, the last presenter and many of us coming in kind of are looking for some ways of grasping the moment and trying to make sense out of all the things that are happening and how we sort of see our place and maybe even kind of capitalize on the moment and the opportunities that it brings. And this has been kind of bubbling around in my head for a while. And I come from outside law. I like to say from everywhere but law. And only joined in this industry in 2019 when I joined Fulcrum GT. And in that earlier in my career, and actually, you have a similar experience, Bob. I watched transformations happen in other industries and was a catalyst of many of those, right? In healthcare and in financial services and in travel and entertainment and high-tech manufacturing and CPG. And so, but I noticed when I joined law that law was kind of lagging, kind of like really lagging, like decades even in some cases. And it was confusing to me at the time. And of course, there's plenty of tech in law. It's not that there isn't technology enablement, but something about the digital transformation that was going on in law just didn't seem like it took root the way that it did in airline reservation systems or, in warehouse management or something like that. And really only in the last few years, as AI kind of really matured to the state where it's now kind of commercially acceptable and generally available, I realized that one of the main reasons that legal was held back was because of the nature of the work. The work is cognitive, it's prosaic and long form, and it's a feature, not a bug, that the content is unstructured, right? That's part of what is there, why it's there. It's there to be nuanced. And technology, just many attempts at doing so to sort of, by indirect means, couldn't engage fully in the work products of legal the way it can today. And we all know what that means, right? The large language models and the kind of potential for automation, the potential for technology to be an equal participant in the legal process, the way that an e-commerce site is, an equal participant in the sale of packaged goods. That seat at the table for technology. And so the internet had its moment, and IT was permanently transformed as a result of the mass commercialization and adoption of the web. Likewise, we're at a spot now where legal is at its internet moment, if you want to call it that, where AI, the mass commercialization and adoption of AI, can have that same power of transformation, full digital native transformation of this industry. That's what I think we're all looking at and seeing. So I went down a thought experiment, and I bounced it off of these gentlemen, and we kind of asked ourselves, what are the learnings? What are the things from IT that we can look at, maybe what not to do in some cases? And so I've generated a lot of content about this, and I have some questions that, we may stick to the script, or we may deviate from the script a little bit because, the air, I feel something in the air here, but wait, that was the last song before we came on stage. But anyway, so I'll start out with a couple questions. So I guess the first question I'll send your way, Bob, which is this question of the cost center to competitive advantage, right? That's like a big trope. It's the holy grail. It's a lot of what people want to see happen. It was in Jeff's comments. And you see that happened in IT, right? It was the back office management information systems back before the internet kind of came about. And then it turned into the center of so many strategic technical businesses that, it became a transformed industry. How do we transform legal ops, and what role does technology kind of play in that transformation?
I think there's a couple of ways that I would answer this. This has been a bit of the unicorn journey of saying, hey, how do we make legal in this gold mine of the legal services and the data that we produce and sit upon? How do we productize it and in our enterprise construct, monetize it, right? To mine that gold and use it. When you look at IT, I think one of the basic questions that we often overlook is comparing what our definition of competitive advantage is from the legal perspective vis-a-vis the enterprise point of view. And I think there's some refactoring of that alignment to what competitive advantage is. And borrowing from enterprise IT, right, they were sitting on all of this, just like legal, almost a labor and cost arbitrage as a starting point. But if our hypothesis that we've all had for almost 20 years now, that it's really about the gold living in the data, I think like fashion, there are some of these trends that the old becomes new again. And when I think about putting my IT hat on, I start thinking about information architecture. And again, that is where IT started. Not only did they reframe what is the competitive advantage in alignment with the value drivers from the enterprise standpoint, which I honestly believe oftentimes revenue is king, and we don't always think about how we can use the legal data to power some of those levers rather than always beating the risk mitigation legal risk drum. But then how are we implementing kind of the value-added data framework, and how are we thinking about the data layer and then the legal service layer on top of it? Then how are we thinking about creating more of again, it's been a 10-year-old journey where we've been talking about a legal data model Yet when we think about how we've organized ourselves, we've got a contracts data model, an ELM data model, an IP data model, a litigation data model. If we can't get our house in order from an IA perspective, from a definition, and even an interoperability, how will we ever connect that externally from legal to the value drivers and the things that enterprise deems as kind of where the gold rubber meets the road, if you will?
Okay. So, Marcelo, we talk about operations and operational efficiencies, but let's think about it like this. In IT, again, kind of drawing from the parallel, infrastructure went from being this thing that took sometimes years to build out a data center to months, to weeks, to days, to real time with cloud. And so optimization or efficiencies kind of isn't really the game that we're in anymore there. We're in a world where infrastructure is something that can be obtained at any scale, at any time, for any purpose, right? And that's a similar question to legal, like when you take something and you optimize it to the point where it's like real time or near real time, what does that look like for law? And I guess what operational models does that kind of spawn when you're no longer thinking about efficiency, you're thinking about access in any form at any time to legal advice, to legal services, to legal professionals, to like that sort of takes the whole thing and changes it so that now the laws of physics are different. How does that look?
That's a great question. I think that it's going back to the first portion of like the frame here and the angle and the competitive advantage that should be factored in here. I think that there's a real need for us to go back to like pressure testing the why of the function. Like, why do we exist as a legal organization? What is the value add that we deliver to the business? Like, if we went away tomorrow, what would be the consequence? And have your team to be able to answer that. And when I say team, it's like the GC, the CLO, and their immediate leadership team to be able to answer that very clearly, same way, consistently, in a way that is crisp. Like, this is what we deliver to the business. It's the enablement of the enterprise through the lens of trust and license to operate. It's the enablement of the business through the lens of, like, let's be close to the business and enable the processes that require our presence, and in a way that is smarter and following the approach that the business is taking. And let's remove ourselves from the areas that we're not well positioned to serve. And it could be because our cost model is not aligned with the task that is being performed by legal today. So I think that it requires us to be very, very intentional in terms of like, what are we even doing here? Then going back to the flavor of like, how do we apply this? I think that we have to acknowledge that we are followers, right? Like when we look at the other functions, they have been ahead. And I think that because there's greater connecting tissue, IT is a great example of IT and the business. And I think that also because the business has demanded more accountability from these other functions than from legal, probably because they understand them better, or because they are points of failure for the business more than legal is. But if we look at what they are doing, how they are positioning themselves, and how they are approaching their support to the business, I think that there's a lot for us to learn there.
Yeah, Dino, I would add to that, just to try to make this operating model thing very tangible with like a visual. I was recently at a wedding, and many of you have seen the 3-tiered cakes, right? Think about it as 3 different opportunity sets in our op model. One of 3 I know we're all squarely thinking about, and that is how do we AI enable all of the legal services and workflows that all are our everyday jobs, right? That's table stakes. But I think the second one that maybe we aren't necessarily thinking of and focusing on as much, which goes to the heartbeat of running legal like a business, is the oversight and management. Like when we start thinking about service delivery and operating model, just like we see it in any other versions in IT, customer service, you name it, there's always this ecosystem approach, but there's always opportunity to use AI to manage supply and demand management, to be monitoring the continuous health of the overall data pipelines, the underlying solutions. But I'm not sure if we've kind of made that leap of faith to actually treat an infrastructure up and service layer a layer on top of our traditional legal services operating model. And then third, as I go to the last layer of the cake, kind of the, whether you want to say the top is the pie in the sky or the bottom, but I really want us to be thinking about, I'll call them adjacencies. What are the things outside of legal that legal has the data and the rich gold that can power enterprise use cases? Like, for example, we've been kicking around, how do you mine contract obligations for something as routine as perhaps pricing adjustments and the rights that we have or that we're owed and jurisdictions that we can and we can't? How are we actually taking that information, powering it back to the team responsible for driving revenue with pricing arbitrage and shoring up those opportunities? Or another one close to my heart, right? Many of us have, we have product areas, so think Google Maps, think YouTube, et cetera. But how are we thinking about the capability gaps that are causing legal or regulatory risk? How are we looking at our case profile? How are we identifying the root cause issues that are born by, let's say, a product's liability gap? And how are we feeding that information back intelligibly to the ecosystem of the product areas who are developing the solutions, taking them to market, but doing so leveraging our inside baseball of, well, if you tweak this product, change that feature, now it can operate in multiple more jurisdictions. And by the way, you can have additional revenue capture because now we're not going to take it and miss revenue because now we have a value add feature, and we're not going to take it in the shorts when we get sued, because we've seen that happen 30 times this year. That's kind of that third layer of the cake that I often think we're not thinking about it, back to the first point of like defining what is competitive advantage.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, when you think about sort of enabling this sort of predictive power, or, in the past, you were like kind of rushing in to kind of shore up where there were gaps that had already been, exposed through lawsuits or something like that. And you can kind of get out ahead of it in some way. There's some things that are, necessary to do that. A couple things like, how well you know your data. That's a big question. Another thing about how well integrated are you into your business units, from an organizational perspective or from even from just integration. The third one is about your landscape, your solution landscape, your vendors landscape. So these are sort of three big pieces in my mind where, again, IT had its own experiences. The organization of IT changed when the internet became the main focus of a business's strategy, market strategy. They became an internal agency. They became consultants to their business unit partners. They then built a infrastructure of shared services and built a vendor colony around them to sort of support them. And when I look at sort of legal operations, there's some pieces of that kind of in place. There is a core and non-core question, what to keep inside, what to send outside. There is a vendor kind of colony, and of course there's outside counsel, which are agencies, so to speak, who are participants in this ecosystem. And it really starts to look like a supply chain. Certainly IT became a supply chain. Legal, I don't feel like has gotten to that point yet because of lack of strategy alignment and lack of instrumentation to kind of make that happen. And the behaviors of the participants, they don't really think of themselves as participants in that side, whether they're inside or outside. So I kind of want to munge together a couple questions here, but maybe we can start, Marcelo, on the subject of organization, of sort of business participation, business strategy, or like aligning yourself in the business, and how that kind of affects the demand for legal services.
Mm-hmm. So I think that the value add from the point of view of like your participation with the business needs to be front and center. as you think about like your collaboration with business organizations, and I think that the examples that Bob gave are really good. Like, and then thinking about like, okay, what is the business requiring from us? How is it that we are showing up? How is it that we are assetizing the support from the business, and who is delivering that, and in what form? I think that we have an opportunity here to grab inspiration. You mentioned supply chain. That's very much a parallel that we need to think of, not only through the lens of the ecosystem, but as legal operations, like operational excellence, right? Like have all the Six Sigma, like lean approach, right? Think about the SIPOCs, like your supplier, input, process, output, customer. How is it that you're redesigning those for the future in a way that is smarter? And I think that what we see frequently is that the legal practitioners, they tend to partner less with legal operations than what I see with other functions, where there's more this like co-development and co-creation of value between those that are the subject matter experts that really sit with the function, the financial experts, the IT experts, and those who are building the bridge of that with the business, which is our case, right? And it's almost like we are forcing, in many situations, legal practitioners to give up on old ways of working, adopt something different. It could be a technology. It could be a different participation in the process. It could be a breakdown of the tasks, right? I think that we don't do that really well. If we were a hospital, using maybe a different analogy here, you would have physicians parking people's cars, serving people coffee. Like we're not good at segmenting that, right? So I think that there's a lot that we can do right now, but I think that the sense of urgency needs to come through the lens of incentives that may not be present, right? And maybe I'll offer this, Dino. Like a system, and I was having this conversation with Jeff, a system is always perfect, right? In the sense that the output of the system is exactly what the system was designed to deliver. So the way we are operating today as legal organizations is exactly the result of this system that we are adopting today, which is our culture, our ways of working, and how we interact with the business. So I think that we have to revise this, right? Like starting from looking at the output and how is it that we need to readjust the system to deliver that. It will be an ecosystem, right? We will need to bring our vendors with us, our law firms, our internal teams. But I think that the intelligence that legal operations has is such that we are going to be in a better position to orchestrate that in partnership with the CLO, with the GC, in a way that maybe no one else is, right? Not maybe, no one else is.
Yeah. I mean, there's certainly something I've been saying about this sort of sleeping giant. I use that analogy sort of to talk about legal ops, that you're sitting on resources, on skills and assets and data, and when you wake up, like it just will be this transformational force in the business. I want to see that happen. But there's a culture component of that too. And so that involves like the amount of change. Now, one thing we're all sort of sitting here reeling about is just how much change we're already trying to process. And so now we're talking about more change. Okay. But maybe we can talk about that in the context of, one thing you said was incentives. Another thing we can talk about is the style of engagement and what are the skill sets. A lot of us sitting here think, I got to learn how to be a prompt engineer. Okay, yes, that's kind of like saying I got to learn how to use Microsoft Excel. No kidding. But that's it's a little bit of a job right now, the way that, at the very beginning of the web days, somebody learned how to use Microsoft Front Page and thought I'm going to be a webmaster, It'll be quaint at some point. But there are other skills that are really important, all of which have the bionic arms of AI to power them and make them really potent. But those skills are things that I think we need to really understand and how we bring those forward inside of legal operations. So I'd love to talk about the cultural elements of that.
I'd say this. From a cultural perspective, I'll provide a little just commentary. Two things. One is our organizational structure where we pod up under the overall banner of legal and pick your favorite function or the team you belong to, right? I believe many of the organizational functions under legal are really born out of what we saw and mirrored from the law firms. Just like they potted up by practice area, the unintended consequence of that is it actually takes us further away from the North Star of information sharing and collaboration and unified or harmonized data to be used at scale. Because if you think about it, the IP team has their data set with their supporting point solutions and their data model and taxonomy that's meaningful to them. Same thing in contracting or wash, rinse, repeat on all the different legal functions. So there's this mental shift to start thinking about it as a portfolio or holistically, both at a department level and then at an enterprise level. And that tends to be a stretch. And the other comment I'd share is there's been this decades-long sort of conflict, if you will, between the practice of law, which is often deemed artistry, and then the factory work of legal operations. And I think this community is going to be instrumental in helping to myth bust that narrative and kind of put a modern day face to it, right? Where, you know, I love all things mechanical, especially things that go really fast. So if you love Mercedes and the AMG products or GM and the new Corvette, right? 80% of those vehicles are mass produced, and like that's the legal ops factory work. But the engines are still hand built and signed by the actual person who made the engine. That's the artistry work. And I think finding that right blend and realizing that you can think about the department and the enterprise holistically, and there's a place for both the artists and the factory work to enable not only for us to work across legal as a true portfolio and department, but then make that extensible out to enterprise. I think it starts with those important cultural shifts to get away from the pod mentality, to realize that if you do everything by art, by people, we all know it's not scalable, full stop. It just won't be. And if the last piece I'll leave you with is also from an enterprise IT perspective, I think that there is a big shift for us in this room. You'll hear it in Marcelo and I's next talk, but when you think about all the solutions you all have launched over the years that you've brought value to legal operations, there are more common components than we often identify and think about. And some of those should be done in concert with enterprise IT, because if we can't have durable, sustainable, scalable, and secure enterprise architecture, good luck unlocking the value of the data level to put agentic services at scale. Right? You can't do that with 8 different knowledge management repositories and architecture. And that's a different muscle for us to get a seat at that enterprise IT table and have a say born out of the value drivers as to how it's going to increase revenue, how it's going to power the enterprise OKRs and not just legals, right? That's a very different shift. And we all are going to have to be exec storytellers, strategists, architects, at levels that we haven't had to before.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the audience, like, who transitioned to legal ops from an attorney role? Like, a quick show of hands. Like, if you were an attorney, transitioned to legal ops? Not that much, right? I did that like 9 years ago. And I was lucky enough to meet with Connie when I did so, and we had great conversations. Which a quick comment when I was looking at Jeff's presentation and the care component, I could see that with my eyes. Like Connie offered to even join us. By the time that we met, I was at Lenovo. She joined us in a legal leadership meeting that we had in Raleigh, and she talked about legal ops to an audience that was really far from it. And it was interesting that I don't know if this is going to resonate with those of you who transitioned from an attorney role to a legal ops role, which was my case. I thought that it was difficult to manage like a bet the company litigation case or like an ugly compliance investigation. Boy, I was not ready for change management. I want to say that I bring scars from like doing this for like the past decade or so that I had no idea that I would find as a legal professional trying to work with my former peers and colleagues to bring them to a more business-centric and elevated role. There's so much resistance. There's so much headwinds. And I think that part of the culture is something that we truly need to address now. And it comes from multiple dimensions and angles. And I think that it's really holding us back more than we realize. And we're going to approach this in our session when we're going to be talking about scaling the legal function. But I think that really thinking about like organizational health, accountability, like all these elements that are so important, business centricity, and bringing our legal professionals to a future that if they decide to partner with legal ops, the future is bright, right, for a lot of those, right? But I think that we are in a very unique moment through the lens of like the intersection that we are right now. And I think that it's very much this session. Like, what if IT had chosen differently? Mm-hmm. What if they didn't adapt? Would IT be the one designing the .com e-commerce strategies, the data strategies? Or would that be built as a muscle elsewhere? And IT would still be like a keep the lights on function.
There are places that you can look at where that alternative evolution did take place and where IT did get displaced. And so you can learn from, go out and see where companies that didn't really embrace technology and don't exist anymore, for instance. You know, we have that hindsight to at least be able to play that out now in a way where if we understand the corollaries a little bit, we can see what the risk or what the potential outcome for that would look like. If we can't do the things that we think we can do with this approach in legal ops, what is the alternative? What does it look like? Last kind of thought I wanted to dwell on a little bit here was this idea. I've heard this, this is my third RLLB conference. And one of the things I've heard folks in legal ops say is that sometimes they're the last to know when there's a matter or there's a legal need. And so you hear about it like suddenly and you realize now you got to catch up. And this is sort of a problem that a lot of older businesses had pre-internet, where they didn't know what the demand was for their products or services. And they would sell out because suddenly everybody wanted a Furby or something like that. And then, of course, as the web kind of and analytics and things like that got more entrenched, they could analyze customer behavior. They could get out ahead and even predict or forecast when they needed to have more raw materials or when they had to have shipments in certain warehouses for distribution. They could kind of get to that point because they had access to their customer data. And they could, in order to get that access to that customer data, they had to give control to their customers. It's like this reversal of control. You're no longer outbound sales. You were no longer, the catalog. Instead, you basically let the customers into your warehouse and let them shop. And they browsed, and they got all that rich data that you could analyze and things like that. But that reversal of control is something that the vendors, the merchants, had to give to their customers. So one thing that might help here is to think about how you don't want to be the last to know, you want to be predicting. And in order for you to be predicting, you have to give your customers control. Now that sounds scary, but in some ways it's kind of a myth anyway, because if you're the last to know, then you're not really in control, right? So, but it's a question of how to instrument it in such a way so you can collect that information, you can understand demand. You have that plus global inputs, you've got feeds and sources and information to help you make decisions. And I guess I wanted to talk about that because it has to do with integration, and it also has to do with the way you engage the business. And you guys, I know, have lots of talking points about these things later in the presentations today, but I just wanted to ask a little about this, frame it as this reversal of control, and ask, is that a challenge that legal ops has to take on, and thinking about how to get embedded further up the demand chain, in other words, and into the heart of where the matters are, where they're lurking, sly and irresistible, just waiting to get picked up and capitalize.
You want to go? Look, I'll say this. I'm very divided on that, and here's why. As I mentioned my wedding cake, yes, I believe we need to do more in that second layer of the oversight and management. The how we get there, we'll be talking about in the next session. But I'm not sure, given the comment around giving control to the customers, I believe in meeting customers where they are and making our services readily accessible, self-service, easing the transition to engage us more seamlessly, not through emails or chats or spreadsheets or one-off docs, but to do it through integrations in a very user-centric point of view. I also believe that, in what I've seen, that this set of functions is so nuanced and deep that I don't see it coming from, in a meaningful way, another enterprise team. I mean, heck, when I was in IT, one of the big problems is they didn't have the domain or subject matter expertise on the IT side, and that's why they had multiple IT leaders rotate out. So if you give them the pen, boy, you're probably not going to like the model that they're going to do onto you. So where does that leave you? It leaves us with the indelible commitment and journey. Grab the damn pen, and we have to start thinking further out, just like a product area or an IT team, where a 2 to 3 year roadmap is table stakes. Our roadmaps tend to be kind of motherhood and apple pie, not really set on long-term North Star, supported by enterprise architecture, backed by best-in-class third-party solutions, glued together by a legal and, dare I say, enterprise connection points with the data model to enable interoperability. And if we don't grab the pen and do that, somebody else is going to try to do it for us in a sequencing that won't be right in alignment with what our values and ROIs will be. And we're going to be, again, to where you started, the last to know about it, and then playing catch up all over again. So I really put that call to action. Those 3 year plans are going to become a mainstay, especially because of the way in which I think the technology is going to be a great enabler. That stuff can't be committed to, staffed, developed, tested, and deployed overnight, even whether it's 1P or 3P, but most likely in a hybrid environment. So
Okay.
that's how I would answer it.
Yeah. What I would add is, I think that legal ops, we serve the legal function, and we know that, right? But in my mind, we serve the enterprise just as much. And I think that we need to understand where is it that our stakeholders inside of the legal organization are potentially holding us back from delivering more value to the enterprise. And it's a very delicate balance. We don't want to break trust, we don't want to burn the bridges, but at the same time, we need to do what is right for the enterprise. And when we are being held back, I think that we need to realize why. And I think that there's some elements of innovation that we need to be so smart about. But because when we talk about innovation, typically it feels like it's going to be a party and everybody's going to come in happy and it's going to be like a celebration of the new. It's not, right? People are going to say one thing, are going to do something else. They're going to do something when you're not looking. They're not going to adopt this. We know how it goes. And there's a very interesting book by Adam Grant. It's called The Originals. And it talks about the Trojan horsing of innovation. How is it that you can introduce innovation in a way that is activating less the antibodies of change? And I think that meeting customers, meeting your business where they are, in some situations will require us legal ops professionals to be very intentional about structuring our dialogue and our strategy directly with the business and bringing our practitioners with us for what will be the highest and best use of legal talent and legal to the business in a way that sometimes it's not going to be like a dialogue where everybody's going to be exactly at the same page with you, because they sometimes will not have the same incentives, they will not have the same knowledge, they will be operating with fear. There's a lot there. But I think that we need to be paying attention to the fact that we have a responsibility with the enterprise, with the shareholder. We need to make the company win ultimately. If we're not paying attention to the business winning, and if we are imprisoned by any other agenda, then we're not really exploring everything that we can.
Yeah. Well, there's obviously a lot to this topic, and I know we could continue going for another half hour at least. Like I said, there's a lot of material I put together about this, and I want to continue that discussion. One thing I'll say is that the metaphors at some point break down, right? It's not like IT. It's not. There's differences, right? But I think that our job, our obligation here is to do the best we can to operate quickly and put decision frameworks in place that help us to understand what we're changing and what the impact of that change is. Because if you change everything all at once, you don't know what worked and what was crazy, and it just becomes a land grab. And at that point, you don't really have any sense of how effective your strategy is. It's just things fell your way. And to me, I think the opportunity for legal ops is real, and I think that it's a very exciting time. I'm very energized by the opportunity because of like I said, the potential of having an organization that some of the smartest people in the business with, like you said, the goal of protecting and benefiting the business. And that if that's at the center of what they're trying to do, then give them the best tools you can. It's not okay anymore for legal ops to not be given the level of investment in technology, like the fair-haired stepchild of the organization, the way it's been. I've seen an underserved market since I started coming to these events. That group needs tools, needs technology, but they also need to know how to use it, not like they found it in a closet somewhere and watch where you point it, Instead, it's got to be something that's in the DNA. It's something that's got to be native. And that's what digital transformation is all about. It's taking something that, wasn't technology driven and turning it into something that it's in the DNA in everything we touch and everything that we do. And my belief is that because of AI, this is the time where this operation can really be fully digitally native. And I hope that happens, and I'm going to try to do everything I can to make it happen. And with that, I'm in. Any last comments?
No, all good.
Are you in?
Yep.
I have no choice.
All right. Thanks, everybody.